Welcome to the lightning talks, and there are 3 presentations, but we haven't coordinated. So we are first. So I will just shortly say what you can expect. So first, it's Julian and me. We have a short session on inventory reference data. Then we have Marva, a Bibframe Editor, and I guess a lot of you are here because of that. And then we have Owen and Björn with the open access app. And that leaves Gloria and Matt for Marva. All right.
I've been trying to improve the English history now a certain way.
Okay. Inventory reference data and considerations when customizing them, translating them, and what you have to do, or what we do during system upgrades. So it's Julian from the Common Library Network, and me. I'm working for one of the member libraries of GBV. Okay, so those of you who are familiar with reference data from inventory will already know it, but just as an introduction and a recap, I will talk shortly about what is inventory reference data. So what do we mean when we say it? They are mainly a pair of a unique ID, so a UUID that is used in FOLIO, and a name or a label, better to say, that is then displayed in the UI. And you also have some more administrative metadata, like a date created or date updated. You can manage them in inventory settings or directly via the APIs. And some of them you can't edit in the UI because there is no entry. So you have to use the API if you want to change something. You then have inventory fields in the instance holding and item entity, where some fields are tied to those reference values. So they are not free text fields. You can only use one of the reference values. And when you populate those fields, then only the UUID is stored and not the name or the label. The UUID is looking up the names to display it in the UI then. And when you do an export, the export only contains the UUID, not the actual name. And that is important to us because we are loading data into my inventory storage. Before you can do any data import, you have to prepare the reference data and make them available, because otherwise the import will fail. So let's say you have a location, a holdings location, and you use a UUID in your incoming data, but you haven't created the location, then the holdings can't be created. It will fail. Okay, just a short example. Story pointer. Yeah, that is from the alternative title types endpoint. So you will see you have an ID, that is the UUID, and you have a name that represents the UUID, and what you then see in the UI is the name mostly. And here an example from a record that is using an alternative title, and you can see the journey through Western Europe. That is an edit page, edit title page title. Oh, that is complicated. And you can see what is in the record, stored in the record, that is just the UUID. And then we took some assumptions at our library network, and we are distinguishing between FOLIO reference values. So they are provided when you install the system and you set one of those parameters that is load reference to true. So then you get all of the reference values, and they have a source equals FOLIO. Some of them will have a source that equals like RDA or MARC, but most of them will have a source of FOLIO. And what you can then do, you can add what we call locally added reference values. They are then added manually in the UI or via the API. In our network, because there are around 500 libraries in GBV, not all of them are using FOLIO yet. There are around 25 using ERM, but they will all have to use, or are all going to use FOLIO in the next 7 to 8 years. We want to define, the UUID in the name so that it is equal in all of the tenants that we are setting up. There is an exception, of course, and that is locations, because they are library specific. One important thing for everyone who is using the system in another language than English, you can't translate the reference values using localize. So that is the tool that you use normally to translate it from English into any other language. But reference values can only have one name or a label. So that is why we thought that it might be a good idea to have the name of the FOLIO reference values, so the system provided ones, so the translations being aligned in all library networks in Germany, so that we always know if we see any UUID, we know what it is representing. Of course, there's also an exception. So if one of the networks or one of the libraries added a local reference value, then there might be no coordination between the networks and you end up with a local reference value. Then, of course, it's not that easy to get an overview where is all of those stuff managed. So we have the FOLIO reference values. They are living in mod inventory storage directly. Then we have a repository for the translations, so where we manage our translations. There's also a shell script that you can run that will then import them. You just have a few parameters like tenant, username, password, and the Okapi URL. Then we have another repository for the locally added reference values, because they are just used in one of the networks and not German-wide. And then we have, we are not using data import. We are using another import tool that we've built ourselves. And we also have to create our mappings, and we have basically a few mapping files. They are written in XSLT. And then there's one file that just takes care of assigning the correct UUIDs if it maps to a given label from the data. And the process until to date is that one of our test tenants serves as reference system for all of those inventory reference values. So when setting up a new tenant, then all the reference with data is copied from this reference system into the other. But it has proven to be quite error prone in the past, because it's a manual process. You have to remember there can anything go wrong, what will go wrong. And what we also were missing is a way of like having a version control, so that we know, okay, it was the reference value was there, had this label, but now it changed because we changed our mind, or there was a new value implemented in a new FOLIO version. And of course, system librarians, we want to be independent from anyone else. So we want to have a way to import and update the data by ourselves. So what do we want to accomplish when we set up a new tenant? So before the initial data loading, we want to have all reference values there, both the FOLIO ones, so the FOLIO reference data, and our GBV specific ones. At best, this step then also includes the translations, so that the FOLIO reference values are translated, and we have to know what locations a library want to use. We had cases where some data, some value reference data has vanished, and we don't know why. So that is why we want to have a way to re-import them if they have gone lost. And also there have been cases where a new version of mod inventory storage came with new reference values that maybe one library has requested, and they were added then to FOLIO. And of course, we want to minimize work and have it as efficient as possible. And that is now true.
Yeah. Now we have our technical solution how to make this happen. The first thing that we have is the translation repository where we put our German translations into, and you can look there. It's designed so that it can be extended for other languages, so it can easily be adopted for French or whatever you want. And the versioning comes for free in GitHub. That's nice, and also the commit history. And yeah, in this repository we have a shell script that can put into the translations into a FOLIO tenant, and then it's there. And to run the shell script, you need the user with permissions, and when the sysop want to install several tenants, then you need to several of those users. So one thing to note, this repository is a temporary solution. There's already been a decision by the technical council that we want the translations being directly in the mod inventory storage module, but this isn't there yet, and until then we need to do it ourselves with this thing that is completely separate from all other folio and is yeah. So then we have the second repository where we have our GBV specific reference data that we need for our union catalog. And yeah, that contains these data in German, of course. Yeah. And we also have a list of special reference data that we don't need that will be deleted. And this repository also has a script, a shell script that can be executed. And now we have some issues. We have at least 20 tenants and will increase in future. And the sysop sitting here don't want to run these manually. And we need a way to make this work fully automated, and so that we cannot do anything wrong, that it will work every time. And the idea is we make a special module that runs these scripts, and so we want to combine these two, the data from these two repositories and also the scripts, and then we put the name of this new module into the install JSON file, and that is used by Okapi to install or migrate a tenant to the new version. And once we do this, everything is fully automated because Okapi knows what to do. And this module will be very small, maybe 5 megabyte container size, because it's based on Alpine. And bad news, this module is not getting read. I haven't started, but it will start then after WOLFcon. So and now you get some details for the people that want to know the technical things, the module descriptors, the thing that Okapi reads, and then now what to do. There's a documentation you can look up if you want to see the details. And what does the module descriptor contain? It has a require section, and there we list the inventory storage module. And so Okapi knows, oh, I first must install mod inventory storage or upgrade mod inventory storage, and then I can run the scripts to put in the German translations and our local values. And Okapi has also the capability to run several modules, the migration or the installation of several modules in parallel. And so it's faster than running it manually. Then you first need to wait until everything has stopped, and then you can run the scripts. And here Okapi knows when to run and can run it in parallel if another module does not have any dependency with another. And another thing is the provide section in the module descriptor that has these post tenant API. That is a special API that is that Okapi calls when we have a tenant and want to install a module. And if we have this new module, then Okapi will call it and will then provide a token. So Okapi creates a new token without the need for any special user with special permissions. So that is very easy and is better than manually running these scripts with some credentials. So that is a very nice feature of Okapi. Yeah, that runs then. And in summary, we have the two repositories with the data, with the commit history that can be used for collaboration so that everyone can provide updates to the data and to the scripts. And using Okapi features makes it work fast in the correct order, parallel execution, and yeah, no need for credentials and automatic execution. So that's our ideas, and I hope to complete this soon. Yeah, thank you, and now to questions. If there are any. Maybe from the online people? No, nothing in the chat. So okay, if everyone is happy, then we think we can go to the next person. Oh, you have a question. Sure.
I'm just wondering, can it be I'm just wondering because reference data has been discussed several rounds in the TC. So is there any changes coming for how to have the reference values represented in FOLIO?
This work here is completely separate and does not change anything in FOLIO. And the things that are discussed is this design, this decision thing that I linked, that requires that these reference data should support internationalization so that multiple languages, values for multiple languages can be put into the module. But this is not, our module is not related to that. That is separate work and once that is there, I can remove part of my code. Okay, thank you.
Hello, everyone. I'm going to be joined by Doug Williams on the Zoom chat, so I'm just going to see if that's working here. Doug,
Hi there, can you hear me, Matt?
Yeah, we can. You want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Doug Loynes. I'm one of the product owners in the FOLIO project at EBSCO, and I'm obviously not Gloria Gonzalez. But I report to Gloria, and so I've been working pretty closely with the Library of Congress since I joined the team in March, and you'll be learning more about what that partnership is, but happy to join FOLIO for my first WOLFcon.
Great, thanks. And I'm Matt Miller. I work at the Library of Congress in the Network Development Mark Standards Office as a linked data technical specialist. Sorry, let me pull up my slides here. So today we're going to be talking about Marva Bibframe Editor for FOLIO. And basically, if you were in Gloria's and Anwar's talk this morning, they had these really great slides and lots of information about the sort of larger idea of Bibframe and FOLIO. And just from those slides, you can tell it's a very big thing, right? Very large project. And a lot of kind of pieces of it are still in motion and all that. But one piece that's not necessarily or one piece that's more kind of like set in like the direction that we're pretty sure we want to go in is the editor. And that's kind of like a very public part or very kind of, visible face of a Bibframe system. So we thought it would be nice to kind of quickly in this lightning talk, just go over some of the, briefly the history of the Bibframe editor at Library of Congress, just to get you a sense of where we're coming from and the experiences we've had with it and kind of where that can lead into FOLIO. And then we're going to talk briefly about the direction of Marva in FOLIO and the current plan for that. So, this might just be interesting to me, but this is kind of like the history of the editor at the library. And I wanted to kind of show this because just to show that, we're coming up almost on 10 years of continual development of an editor in various incarnations. So that kind of points to like the sort of large experiences we've built up with this tool. And so this started out in 2014. It was largely inspired by a prototype editor built by Zafira back in 2013. And so Kim Ford at LC started building this editor. It was like a very sturdy, jQuery application built with like a Node backend. And that was in kind of constant internal development through the teams late teams at LC with help from index data for a couple contracts to improve it and kind of expand it. And really that editor served as the editor for our pilot at the Library of Congress, which, the goal of that pilot was to engage real catalogers working as if they were working in production, generating real metadata. They had a double key, so they would do a record in Mark, and then they would also do the record in Bibframe. And that powered kind of this discovery of what the editor needs to do and the workflows that need to be developed and all that sort of stuff. So that was the main thing. And then in 2020, we kind of decided, we're to the point where we can kind of get this working pretty well, but can we get it to work like, faster, smoother, better experience? And so we commissioned we commissioned an initial user study report, talked to catalogers in depth, get kind of some ideas. What should the editor look like? What would the perfect editor be based on your experience with it? Got that feedback, and then we kind of redesigned it. And we redesigned it using a little bit more modern web technology. So we used Vue.js, which is a React-like sort of reactive framework to developing web applications, but it still had like a Node backend and all that. So the last couple of years we've been working with this new editor, and that's kind of led us into the decision from the library to adopt FOLIO. And we have this editor ready to go, and then how can it be used? So I wanted to kind of just, if you're not familiar with Bibframe at all, or if you kind of are, but maybe you've not really seen a Bibframe editor or what that could be, it's quite different from like the Mark editor. So I thought it would just be sort of informational if you just kind of get some high level ideas like what would a Bibframe editor look like given. And so in this case these are kind of just the approaches that we at LC have taken to develop an editor. Other folks have made editors too, like Stanford with Sinopia, et cetera. But these are kind of like decisions we made, and they're much different from like how a Mark editor would work. And so one of them is that there's media-based profiles. So you almost call these application profiles. And so, there's like 100 predicates or something in Bibframe ontology. So what are the 20 you need to perfectly describe a Blu-ray DVD? And so we do these profiles so that, you don't need to know every single predicate and how they should be put together. You just are given a list of fields to populate. And then, if someone says, we'd like to say this about the resource, then we can add that to the profile and, continue from there. So those profiles themselves are super valuable because they've been workshopped by a number of catalogers for a number of media for years. And so those are kind of available to be reused in FOLIO going forward. Another big difference is that it's resource-based editing, right? So you have a work and an instance, and instance is like tricky word here because it means something different than like instance in FOLIO, right? Instance in our world, in Bibframe world, means like, not the work, the sort of expression level or whatever you'd want to call that in the WEMI or big fervor kind of land. And then you have the item, and we also are playing around with this idea of hubs too, which is I don't even know if we're going to talk about that further. But hubs are kind of continue in other areas too, like Share VDE has the idea of Opus, and there's this idea of Superworks. It's just kind of this is a continuing standard. It's developing, new ideas are coming about, and might be implemented. The majority of the fields are lookup fields, so the kind of goal is to get as little sort of typing, as little literals as possible into the editor. And if you want to play around with a version of Marva, that's the LC version of it, not the Folio version. You can go to bibframe.org and it's there. So I just wanted to play some videos of like what it looks like, just to kind of get an idea of like some of the workflows that we're trying to capture for Folio. And again, this is the LC version of it, not the Folio version of it, but it will look very similar or be kind of like very similar workflows. So this is just an idea of like you're doing some copy cataloging, which is a major sort of workflow for our initial release. And it's basically, you have a working instance, and you're going to clone the instance so that you can change it because maybe a new edition came out, but you want to reuse the work, something like that. The term copy cataloging is super broad, and we talked about this a lot internally, and it means many different things. But this is kind of like one kind of workflow where you're only editing an instance and reusing data from another instance to kind of continue on to make a new resource. The next one is talking about editing the work. And so adding a contributor. And this just goes to show, we really kind of want everything to be a lookup. This is just going against NAF, personal names, and picking the name. And so there's very little typing. It's mostly just sort of like finding the right entity and associating it with it. And then also, beyond these sort of complicated entities like NAF or subjects, we also have things like, the contributor role, which in this case is like author. So that's also a lookup that's based out of id.lc.gov, used to look up. And then finally, I just want to show this. There was this really great conversation yesterday in the authorities talk about subjects, and they were talking about pre-coordinated headings and like, oh, how would you do pre-coordinated headings in Bibframe? And I wanted just to show you how we do it in Bibframe, at least in this editor. So these advanced sort of methods of input based on Bibframe being a more complicated sort of system, you're not typing string, you're doing all sorts of stuff, requires a lot of sort of development and a thought around the user interface. It's like this interface is one we came up with to help catalogers build a pre-coordinated LCSH heading. And so each one of these pieces of the heading is controlled, but are you picking the right one? Is it the subheading? Is it the main heading? Which vocabulary it is in? Like, so Indonesia is in NAF, so you have to pick the NAF, but not the subheading of NAF. There's lots of rules, right? So this kind of interface helps you build that while still maintaining it as an entity and not just a bunch of strings together. And we iterated on this interface a lot because we use LCSH at LC. And so another kind of interface we did where it actually uses the sort of mark annotation of how an LCSH string is put together. And so you can actually just enter that as a mark annotation format, and it will sort of do the linking for you and say, oh, this piece is that, and this piece is that, and this is, should be connected here. And so this works for a number of things. And so each piece of this pre-coordinated heading is stored as a list, and you can point to each piece of it as an authorized piece of the heading. And of course, if there's like some pieces of it that are not authorized because they were never kind of minted as a URI, you can add it as like a literal there. So these are just so kind of points to this idea of like, more advanced interfaces and where can this go to kind of make editing a Bibframe resource quicker and easier. All right, so I'm going to pass it over to Doug to talk about how this is going to manifest in Folio.
Thanks, Matt. So we were really excited when I first joined. It wasn't clear exactly how Marva would fit in, and then when we started talking about it, it became more and more apparent that this should be the starting place for incorporating the editor into Folio. So that gave a big move forward for us for the Folio project. And so what we ended up doing was targeting the November to December timeframe when Poppy's coming out for what we're calling the thin thread, and that's going to be sort of basically a pre-release. It's going to be focused on copycatting monographs, and it's going to be released to select Folio libraries in their own test environments. And the thin thread referencing, the idea of what's the very smallest, thinnest thing that you can provide that or create that can provide value to the customers. And so that's what we landed on, copy cataloging of monographs. And LC is going to be one of the institutions that will help us evaluate that first iteration of Marva in Folio. Then big deal then is next October for a production Bibframe that's going to support both original and copy cataloging, primarily but not exclusively monographs. And from a Folio perspective, we'll actually have some of that linked data functionality available as part of the ransom release ahead of the October production date for Library of Congress. Next slide. Oh, sorry, I was looking at the wrong slide. So if you go to the next slide, sorry, Matt. Can you hear me?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Do you want this one or this one?
Yeah, I was talking about the timeline.
Okay.
So then I'll go to key decision.
Okay, you're on the timeline.
Right. No, go. No, I already talked about the timeline.
Okay.
Sorry, my bad. My bad. Two slides. So as far as Marva and Folio go, then we made two key decisions. One was we agreed to refactor Marva in React, which is what we use for Folio. So we're taking that baseline or treating Marva as a baseline and turning it into React code. And we're still in the process of completing that work. But that's going to ensure tight interoperability with Folio. But right behind that was key decision number 2. Marva is a standalone app. So although it's going to be interoperable with Folio, it's not going to be restricted to libraries that only use Folio. It's going to be available as a standalone application. So non-Folio libraries can extend it to their own backend if they choose to. And then, sorry, then the second one was the timeline.
Great. So I think that covers what we wanted to quickly talk about today. Are there any questions or comments? Yeah.
Print from the index list, will the Marva editor be an icon on the Folio menu or the third one too?
Like, do you want to answer that? Is the Marva going to be integrated into Folio, or is it completely standalone?
I think we're figuring out exactly how to provide that integration, but I think one of the things that we expect to support is being able, for example, to do a search in inventory. You may find a record that you want to do and then be able to pull up the Marva editor so that you can catalog or do copy cataloging or do original cataloging within Marva.
But it will be built into Folio. It will be its own toolbar and that. But in addition to that, it will be an external tool if you don't use Folio and you wanted to use it somehow. All right. Any other questions? Hi. Will the implementation be like progressive implementation, or do you plan to put the Marva app right in October 2024? Did you get that, Doug?
No, I didn't. Could you repeat that, Matt?
Yeah, so the question is the deployment of Marva going to be progressive? Will it be available in the October release of Folio?
Well, as I said, we'll have the linked data functionality available as part of the ransoms release. And our target, though, for the Library of Congress is to have the production-ready version available so that there's enough time for testing and prepping the staff to adopt Bibframe for October.
Okay, great, thanks. All right, any other questions? All right, thanks so much for your attention. I think we have one more talk today.
Yeah. The next lightning talk is about the Open Access app, which is I think well known in the German FOLIO library world, but maybe not that much in the US or internationally. I don't think that I have to introduce Owen, but maybe myself. My name is Björn. I'm a librarian at the Leipzig University Library. And yes, I'm sort of, I guess, local implementation. And yes, I'm the convener of Open Access. And Owen will start with a short functional overview of the app. And some background about the impulse, why it has been developed. And I will give some insights, some brief insights on the state of implementation in Saxony. And then we have an outlook to future plans of development.
I'm just trying to work out the best way of getting the presentation on here.
Plug in your own.
Well, that if anybody was in my last session, they'll know that.
Okay, it doesn't.
Well, the last session after I tried to plug in my laptop, it took 20 minutes to get back on track. So,
Perfect.
I'll share. Yeah, I share my screen as well. Okay. Hopefully everybody online can see that slide deck as well, and everybody in the room can, and we're all happy. And I just really enjoyed that last presentation. I was thinking and looking back. I did a lightning talk in 2011 called Linked Data and LCSH at the British Library, and some of the things that I was thinking about then. Like there's such a neat solution in Marva for that dealing with those pre-coordinated headings and the challenges around it. So great, looking great. Okay. Apologies to anybody who's been following me around today. You'll be tired of the sound of my voice. I certainly am. But introduction to the Open Access app. So. A growing number of publisher agreements with universities or with other institutions include open access publication options. So this is where you're entering an agreement, some kind of subscription or agreement for electronic resources maybe, and rather than just buying access to a set of content, you're also through what sometimes called transformative agreements or transformative agreements, open access agreements. They have some aspect that covers the right for your authors or some kind of options for your people within your institution to publish in the titles that are part of that agreement, or publish in a subset of titles that are in that agreement as open access publications. And there are lots of varieties of these things. We're quite early in the process of having these types of agreements, so there's still quite a variety in the way people approach this. A publisher might offer a discount if you have the read and publish, or they might offer freebies to a certain level or whatever. Additionally, in some institutions, certainly not all institutions, but what we're seeing in some institutions is libraries are being made responsible for managing funds that pay for open access publication. So typically, if you want to publish something open access in a journal or an open access book, the publisher of that is no longer going to get revenue from people reading it because it's open access, it's free to everybody. That's the idea. So they want to look for where are they going to get their revenue from. And instead of charging people to read it, they charge what they call an article processing or book processing charge to publish. And so what they're doing as like the idea is that fee covers things like organizing peer review or formatting the paper, doing editing on the book, whatever the services the publisher is offering. So the article or book processing charges are designed to cover those costs. Since once it's done, it's open access, everybody reads it for free. They don't get any way of covering those costs otherwise. So in order to help libraries manage those information relating to open access publication, we developed an open access request application in FOLIO. And it was developed, financed by Leipzig University Library with funds from the European Regional Development Fund. The development work was done by a UK firm called Knowledge Integration, and I work with Knowledge Integration on a number of projects, and this was one of them. And so I am the product owner, which in FOLIO terms means I'm kind of responsible for the app and working out how it should do, what it needs to do, talking to users about what it needs to do, and getting the developers to understand and then deliver that functionality. Okay. So what does the open access app do? It's for recording the details of a request to publish an open access book or journal article. So typically somebody might say, well, I want to publish this open access. Do you have the funds to pay for it? And so you record like, yes, this person's made a request. This is what they want to publish. Or there are different ways that might reach the library. Sometimes that conversation is between the author and the publisher, and then that kind of information comes back to the library when the publisher says, oh, one of your authors has published this article, here's the invoice. It's that can happen in different ways, but you want to record the details of what was published. There are always locally defined workflows. When we talk to institutions, and the vast majority of institutions who engaged in the process of this development have been German institutions. I think probably because in Germany, national funding bodies have provided funds at a national level, which have trickled through to the libraries to manage. And so there's kind of lots of need there. We have seen, certainly, I know in the UK, similar situations. I don't know how well that's reflected across the world. I think in some places it's happening a bit, maybe in other places not so much. I think in the US, perhaps not so much, but I've heard even here this couple of days that maybe at a federal level we're seeing that kind of thing happening as well now. So this may become more of a concern for across the international community. But lots of different locally defined workflows. Exactly how this works in every institution is different. I mean, of course, you could probably pick any library process and find that was true. But because open access is new, we're all finding our way. I think there was a lot more variety maybe because of that, like everybody's having to invent new processes and finding what works for them. And also, this doesn't really sit, like, if you need to do this, a lot of the people doing this work in institutions, they may be sitting in the library, but they're probably not the people who are doing all of the other library work. So it's not like it's your acquisition staff doing this. It's like a whole new bunch of staff who need to think about the processes. And in terms of FOLIO, engage with FOLIO probably for the first time. And this is probably the first time they'll have used FOLIO to do anything, even if the library is already engaged with FOLIO overall. So ensuring that all aspects of open access publication are completed. Often these funds come with strings attached. You have to report, you have to record loads of information, you have to make sure that payment is assigned and paid correctly. There are lots of rules around it, so those all need to be taken into consideration. But I mentioned at the start, these are often called read and publish agreements. They are often part of your electronic subscriptions or overall subscriptions in your library. So it's not like this is like as well as something. It's like when you've usually paid a subscription agreement, now the publisher might say, we have a read and publish agreement, maybe you want that instead, and that will replace it. So it is also a traditional agreement. Some content might not be open access, and that is covered by the subscription side of the agreement, the read side of the agreement. Some of it will be published open access, and that's covered by the publish side of the agreement. So they are agreements, and in Folio, we have an agreements app, and so we wanted to integrate with that. So you could say, here's an agreement, it's a read and publish agreement. These are the terms around like publishing in this under this agreement. And here are all the requests that were published under those terms. So all the papers from our institution published under those terms. Really important to Leipzig, I think, but to others is like that should all integrate with Folio Finance. Like we don't want to like this is all coming out of some fund managed by the library, sometimes additional funding as well. But essentially, if the library's managing this, we want to represent those funds in Finance app and have invoices passed in the invoice app. Although interestingly, with open access publication requests, there is no order. So you're not ordering, usually, you're not making an order for this to be published. It happens and then you get invoiced. You'll see that there's some aspects of that there that we've had to deal with. And reporting, I mentioned, but the last thing, like there are standardized reporting formats that are starting to develop. I think, again, there's lots of like, I wouldn't say these things are well bedded in yet, but in Germany, all the libraries are expected to report in a format called Open APC, and that all gets pushed into a central repository covering all of the expenditure on open access, APCs and BPCs, article processing charges and book processing charges across all of the German libraries reporting on that. So you can see, like in Germany, this is how much it's costing us to publish our research. I mean, that may be a slight simplification, but that's the basic idea. And again, I've seen this in the UK as well, at a national level, wanting to come up with metrics and also look at things like how much are we paying for this, like what's the average cost of publishing in the Springer journal, or what's the average cost of publishing an open access book with a particular publisher. Right, I will. Is there a mic stand? There's no mic stands. Okay. Oh, thank you, Julian. I did want to. I have a dynamic mic stand. I did want to. Does that work? Felix has got a radio mic. I did want to just. Yep. Okay, brilliant. Okay. How's that? Hopefully everybody can hear me still. I did want to show what this looked like in Folio. Working? Yeah, I think that's working.
It's the sharing.
Oh, the sharing is paused. Oh, interesting. Okay. Right, I don't know how I managed to do that. Windows machines. So we call these things publication requests. They're kind of a request to publish something. And in theory, if a researcher in your institution says, I want to publish this, I want to use funds available to pay for the publication as this is an open access publication, the answer could be no, right? So there could be reasons why that's not going to happen. And there are lots of different reasons, because it's kind of a complex set of things. There are things that, like if you have a read and publish agreement, some types of publication are covered by that. So a research article typically would be, but if it's a book review, no. So like there's no kind of upfront, you might not know. So when we record the publication request, it's a request essentially for the library or the payer to give some kind of money, usually, to make this happen. And so that's why we call them publication requests, that they might eventually end up with, no, we're not doing that. Now, some institutions are interested in recording only the things that are published that they pay for, and some institutions are interested in recording all the requests they get, whether they end up paying for them or not, because they want to think about how much work is this costing us overall, rather than how much do the successful requests cost us. You know, different institutions, different views on what's required. So we have a request date, the date the request was made, and a status. These are kind of, I guess, a bit motherhood and apple pie. Typically, when you make a publication request, there needs to be an author in your institution. We call it the corresponding author. That's the author corresponding with the publisher about the publication. Usually, a publisher, if it's under one of your agreements, will require that the corresponding author belongs to your institution for it to fall under your, you can't kind of say, well, Joe is publishing at Texas A&M, but one of our guys has contributed to it, or, one of our researchers has contributed to it. So let's put it under our agreement. No, they don't want that. If the corresponding author, the lead author usually, but the corresponding author has to be in your institution. So, that's down to you to check, but we have like an internal list of people in the app that you can add to. We don't use users because they may not be Folio users. They might not be otherwise using the library. They certainly won't be a member of staff in your library. So that's a separate list of people, and you can add in the various information, just the information that's required to describe them as far as they need for the open access request. We also have a separate request contact. Often that is also the corresponding author, so you can check this box and just copy that down. But if there's somebody who's doing the administration in the department who's different, so maybe you're dealing with the admin in the department and they're doing it on behalf of their professor or whoever, then that can work out. So if we say this is a journal article, and we can put in all the details, and this is going to be published in a journal. And I'll just pick a journal. Again, there's an internal list of journals. You can add to that list as you need to, but it's internal to the Open Access app. Definitely, we would like to see better integration. Certainly, I'm also responsible for the Agreements app. I'd like to see better integration there with some of the other places we're already storing journal information, but at the moment, it's a separate list. So I'm going to say this is a Wiley. It's going to be published under a CC BY license. This kind of subtype, this is where you can say, for instance, it's a research article, which might be important to then judge later whether you are actually going to be able to fund it or not, or whether it's covered by your agreement. There are, maybe I can not go into all of the detail here, but these are all the kinds of things that they want to record about the application request. We might need to know who's funded it, and sometimes publication could be funded by a different body to the research itself, and sometimes that's part of the research.
I saw an author field. Is that a free text field or?
Yeah, so the corresponding author is a restricted list, and that's like the primary kind of thing. Here in the bibliographic data, I say bibliographic data is very loose. You just can put in a string of authors, because that could be 250 or it could be 2 or 1. So we're not controlling that at all. This is not a cataloging project. It's like enough to describe the publication. Definitely can see that it might be better to split that down and do a better job there, but at the moment it's just like, if you need to record the author, you can put the authors for that publication, you can put them in. Yeah, that's it. So let's say, for instance, DFG, which is the German National Research Funding, where funded this research, so that might be important in terms of how you can fund it. And is this part of an agreement? So it's me. So if I have a look, we've got a Wiley agreement. This was Wiley publication. Yes, we have. Isn't it a coincidence? And now I can save, say there, part of the Faculty of Medicine. So now I've got that request. And I can see in, there's some problems there, but I can see here the agreement. And if there are, in the agreement, you can define special open access properties. And so this is saying that authors will be identified under this agreement with ORCID, and that this is a read and publish agreement. So we can add, I mean, those are pretty nonsense values, but you could add as many open access properties as you need to the agreement, and they show on every request that's linked to that agreement. So if you need to like say, oh, well, does this support review articles as well as research articles, that's something you can put in the property. Once you've got all that information, let's say there's going to be a charge for this. So you can add a charge. We have different categories of charge. And this, essentially the charge is, like I think of the charge as a little bit, there is no order here, but the charge is kind of like, a bit like setting up the idea of an order, that there is going to be a charge for this. We're going to get an invoice. So this allows us to set up all of the things we might expect to be able to do. In Germany, these are subject to a 19% tax rate, but in like California, they're subject to a 0% tax rate. So it's like different. That's set at a, you can set the tax rate default at a system level, at tenant level, and that will be automatically filled for you. And then you can adjust it manually on the actual charge if you need to. There is so often a split of charge across multiple payees. So like you might have a limit of, like, say, we can pay 2,000 euros from central funds, but no more. So if this is 2,100 euros, then you have to find the other 100 euros. So there can be a split. We don't at the moment have integration into anything like transactions, because transactions require an order and an invoice, or one of those two. And we don't have an order at this point. So we can't create a transaction. I think that would be something we'd like to do. If I save this, now I've got that charge, and there could be multiple charges for a single publication. So typically the APC charge would be covered by central funding, for example. But if there were color charges, so if you're printing color diagrams in the article, there might be additional color charges that are not covered by any like national funding. They don't pay you to print in color, they pay you to print research. And so you might have multiple charges. Again, we've seen different views on this, like some institutions want to record all the charges, whether they're paying them or not. Some only want to record the charges they're responsible for paying. So different options. And then eventually, and I'll stop then, if we take a charge, we can then link an invoice line to this charge. You can do this from either direction. You can create an invoice and an invoice line in invoices, and then link it into a charge from here. So when I click add an invoice, I see the invoices that are already open, or I can create a new invoice from here. And this is directly creating invoices into the Invoices app. So I get prompted for my minimal information here. I don't think Wiley exists as an organization, so I'm just going to say it's someone else. And then I've got invoice, I need to add an invoice line. That's going to be new as well. If there were existing ones on this invoice, then it would prompt me to select one of those if it matched one that exists. And that's created the invoice line, and I can save and close that. So now we have an invoice on here and the invoice line, and I can link and view that in invoices, and the description is taken from the charge, so you can make that a little bit more meaningful if you want. You will want to. And you can now do all the fund distribution you'd expect to do, because now it's an invoice line, all of that other stuff works. So we're now at the point where we can link that together. There are definitely some kind of quirks around this. There's linking one way, but not both ways, because like we can create the link from our side, but it doesn't link back, because invoice lines can either link to an order line or nothing, like have an internal description but don't link to anything else. Again, you know, future things we'd love to sort out. But I think that is probably enough. And I shall.
Would you like to show it?
Oh yes, thank you, Björn. It is on my list to show. Yeah. So it's a really good point. I mentioned how all these different workflows. So we realized we were not going to be able to come up with an app that sorted everybody's individual workflow. So we have built in open access what's called a task list, and you can create this. This is tenant created. You create a list of, or a checklist we call it. You create your checklist. Each checklist item can either be yes, no, or other. So it's, whether you think of that as yes and no, or done or not done, like it's basically a status check or cross. So have I added the funder? Yes, I have. And I can add some notes. Funder is DFG because great. And that's a list of notes. So you can see like the most recent one at the top, and we can kind of see if there are tasks. If that's a task, if you think of it as a task, you can like keep up to date with where it's at. So maybe this isn't done yet, but I spoke to them on Tuesday, or whatever it is that you want to add into that task. So I added the license. I didn't check the DRHA status. I did check for agreements. And so I've done all this. So you can kind of check stuff off as you do it. It's, again, like we talk about workflow a lot, it's not a workflow solution. It's more like to be a checklist. We call it a checklist deliberately. It's like yes, no, or done, not done. But what it does mean is that, and we also support queries like around this. So you can search for requests that have, let's say, find all the ones where check DRHA status is no, and then I've got some stuff to work through, right? So I can look for ones where it hasn't been set, or I can look for ones where it's been set to a certain value, and I can combine those together. So ones that have been marked as like I haven't checked DRHA yet, but I have checked the OA status, then like maybe those are the things I need to target, because if I've checked one thing, I'm now onto the next, or whatever it is that you're trying to build up. You can kind of flexibly use the checklist filters to do that. And those of you who are familiar with the agreements and licensing app, it's kind of a little bit similar to how we've built the custom property filter builder in those apps. There's a lot of flexibility, and you can combine things together. So yes, thank you. And I will, yeah, Charlotte.
It's not a question. It's just that filter builder.
Yeah,
it's really beautiful.
Oh, thank you.
Format.
And I'll pass over to Björn now to talk about the implementation at Leipzig and in Saxony. Yeah, sure.
Okay, I noticed there was a place where we put in orchid ID.
Yes.
Author.
Yes.
Is that something for an institution that could hypothetically add other identifiers, or is that just for
At the moment, for authors, for the people, we only have the ORCID ID. For For the publications, you can add as many, you can define a set of IDs and add as many as you want. Like there's ones we support, the DOI we support like as a dedicated field, and the others are kind of define a list of IDs you want to record and then do it. But we haven't done that for authors at the moment.
And is there any idea that there might be something actionable with that in future?
Yeah.
Yes, to give Owen the chance to take a breath. I want to give you some insights to the current state of implementation in Saxony. As already said, in Germany, it's the management of OA publication and costs are mostly centralized in libraries and university libraries, and yeah, there's an increasing number of transformative agreements with OA options and OA agreements in general. And the current solutions actually only include two ways. So some libraries use their institutional repository or extend the institutional repository with data about open access publication and costs and so on, and others use spreadsheet software like Excel. So yeah, we used or actually use Excel for this at the moment. And this both solutions have the downside of an integrated missing integrated fund management. So as Owen said, we want to manage our funds integrated in one system. Yes, one fund can have the acquisition of monograph or at the same time also publication for open access. And yeah, there's a great interest in Germany, but yeah, we are also interested, I think, in the perspective of other countries, from the US, from other countries, and yeah, to listen more about the perspective. In Saxony, we have a joint FOLIO platform. We host 4 university libraries, and yeah, just to give you a number, depending on the institution, there are about between 700 and 1,200 open access requests per year, and this is increasing. I would really like to say that we are productive with the app. I mean, it's released in January, but for some yeah, more organizational issues, we haven't managed to go productive with the OA, but we have yeah, the test migration completed and migrated 230 open access requests from this Excel sheets, including authors and charges, and yeah, a colleague of mine yeah, set up an import with 7,200 journals from the publishers' journalists. Yeah, we hope we go productive soon, as well as yeah, other libraries will follow us soon. That's fine. We also started the integration of OA data in MetaDB, index data's MetaDB. So this is in progress because yeah, there's of course the need for reports. And yes, we think about future development, and we hope we get funds for that as well. Yeah, and that's actually the moment where Owen will.
Okay, thanks, Björn. So where do we go next with the app? We've started talk. We have the OA SIG is on Thursdays, and we continue to discuss with that SIG. We meet once a month at the moment, because at the moment we don't have active development, and so once a month is enough. But we obviously want to get feedback as people go live with the product, and also as people start doing things like data migration, to share good practice and to see what issues come up. So there are certain things that we know are things that people would like to see already. So at the moment, when you add a funder to a record, like the funders are just a list of string values, just like you saw I had welcome and DFG and NIH. It just entered as reference data in a list, and you have to choose from those. But funders are organizations with their own policies, and they have also identifiers associated with them, and they have reference numbers which might be like grant numbers or that kind of thing that might relate. So if you say like this piece of research is being published as part of this grant, it may be that the grant is paying part of the cost. So you want to know the grant number for reporting. The funder wants to know how many papers were published under this grant number, all of these things. So we'd like to expand. We have a feature defined in the FOLIO JIRA to expand the funder record, make it a proper set of information, including the funder name, a DOI, other information, funder reference information to record with the request, and look at, for example, integration with the Open Funder Registry, which is a source of data about funders. So we could use that as a source of the organization data about funders and what policies they have and what identifiers they have and all of this stuff. We've had several requests both in Germany and from the UK. I say requests from the UK, those in the UK, there aren't any implementations of this as far as I know in the UK, but we definitely know that in the UK, this is a problem that exists. So I've done work on a similar piece of software in the UK a few years ago of wanting very similar things. And we see there's several kind of services starting to grow up around the open access environment. And the OA switchboard is one of them that seeks to consolidate information coming out of publishers and making sure that that gets to the right institution. So they're a switchboard in the sense that they can act as a hub which gets messages from the publishers and then distributes them to all the stakeholders in that publication. And so there's what's called a P1 message, which is essentially like telling you that something has been published as open access, and those kind of things. Like, it would be great if that just automatically dropped into your system. You can get an institution-specific feed for those. So then, like, rather than having to type in this data based on an email you get from somebody, or at the moment copying it, lots of publishers what they call a publisher dashboard, where you can log in and see your institution publications, but then you have to kind of copy it or export it as CSV, and we don't. So integrating with this kind of system that could make those workflows much easier is definitely something that is a high demand from users, and I think we'd like to do. Again, we have a feature for that. In the same way that funders only exist as strings, publishers only exist as strings. Publishers are definitely a whole other ballgame, and you know, I think it's clear we aren't trying to do kind of cataloging here, right? So the requirements are a little bit different, but publishers are organizations. They are not just like a name. They have, you'll have contacts at publishers. You'll have all of these things that you have about organizations. So again, expanding the publisher to be a proper organization, or at least have more to it than just the string. We also have the challenge that I didn't show this. I didn't want to keep going on with the demonstration, but there is information at the journal level. When you say we're publishing in this journal, and you have a variety of information about that journal that is true today, and tomorrow it might not be true, and that could refer to the publisher. It could refer to the open access status of that journal. It could refer to whether it's indexed in the Directory of Open Access Journals, which is seen by some as a quality marker of an open access journal. There are all these things that are true today, so true when you record the request, but not true tomorrow when something changes for the journal. So what we do in those cases is we have that information stored at the journal level and also at the request level. So when you add a journal to the request, we copy the data that is currently on the journal into the request, and then you can change it on the request if you need to. But if you change it on the journal in the future, You don't have to worry about the old requests. So if the question is, how many of these were published in a hybrid journal? You don't want to answer how many, if you were to count up today, which of those journals are still hybrid. You need to answer, at the time we published, was it in a hybrid journal? And so that information is stored with the request and is like, I mean, it can be edited, but it's not going to change just because the journal changes status. The publisher is another one of those values, but at the moment we don't have a publisher field on the journal. We just have it on the request. So you have to fill that in every time, even though you've already attached the journal. So it's kind of double entry, or at least it feels like double entry, and you can't then see how that's changed over time or any of that. So there's some stuff there that we could expand to do a better job. Anybody who was at my dashboard discussion earlier, we're looking to expand how we use the dashboard. I won't go into it. Watch the video from earlier today. But the dashboard is a way of exposing data from different apps on a single screen for a user to view. It's completely customizable by that user, so they can set up exactly the views that they want. And at the moment, that works with some of the ERM apps, but it can also work with the open access app, because it was developed by the same company and uses the same APIs. And actually, we really need to just define what we need there. And that's quite a simple development for us, because it's basically just a configuration of some existing code. We've started to collect use cases from the OA SIG to work out what are the things that widget would need to be able to support. So basically thinking, what are the searches? And again, this we hope will help with workflow. For example, show all open requests where we're waiting for a reply from someone for at least a week. I didn't show you this, but there's a correspondence field on the open access request where you can add correspondence from publishers, and you can add that incrementally. So you can have multiple correspondence records, but you can also update a correspondence record as you go to say whether you're awaiting a reply, or whether you whether it's closed, that correspondence, or whether they're waiting for a reply from you. So you could use that kind of thing, like show me all the open access requests that have a correspondence record that is waiting a reply, that kind of thing. And show all open requests where there isn't any cost data yet. So maybe, if you haven't added a charge to those yet, those are things you might want to go and work through or sort out. Those are the two we've got so far. I think because everybody's so early in the implementation, they don't really know yet, right? So they're going from, as Björn said, they're going from a system that is essentially ultimately flexible, but very unstructured, or not very unstructured, but a little unstructured with no formalization around it, into a system that has a lot more formalization, but is much more structured and hopefully will bring some rigor to it in a sense but it's a payoff, right? Because they're like, if I want to change a spreadsheet, I just add a column, right? It's like done. If I want to change a folio app, I have to kind of talk to all kinds of people. I think that we'll discover things as people start using this for real, and we'll discover where it needs extending. I think the same is true with the dashboard widget. We'll find people say, oh, I'd love to be able to get a list of requests that fulfill these criteria. And we'll think, well, that could be a dashboard widget, because that's what dashboard widgets do. I think this is my last one. Yeah. Integration with external sources. You asked about ORCID. Like, if you have an ORCID for a user, for an author, there's an API you can call and fill out the rest of their details. Like, why don't we do that? The DOAJ, which is Director of Open Access Journals, it's seen by some as a quality marker, and certainly German libraries are asked to report whether journals are in DOAJ or not. And so that's got an API. We should know whether the journal is in the DOAJ. We shouldn't need the user to tell us, but it needs some process which fetches that data from DOAJ and updates our records. And that can change over time. So it's not a one-off. It's got to keep keeping it up to date. Crossref, for those of you who don't know, source of article data for published articles with DOIs issued by Crossref. Used a lot. It has great APIs. And again, if you could type in if you've got a DOI for the article, you should be able to type that in and get all the data. Now, typically, requests start before publication, so DOIs aren't issued at this point. But later, you have the DOI, you should be able to then just get all the polished data. And that, coming back to the author, that could include any structured author data they have. And, then you're not typing it in, it's just being given to you and incrementally updating. And that's what we'd like to be at eventually. There are definitely more things that we could list here, I think, but those are the major ones I think that have come up as we developed. Again, I think as we see people use this for real, then we'll see that there are other opportunities or other sources that people would like us to start working with. And that is it. I'm very happy to take questions and answer as I can, but thank you very much. Okay, we'll start here and then here. Shall I bring this over?
You can just repeat the question. Is there a flower release that
Okay, that's a really good question. Okay, so we did a release of this in when was it? January, and we had originally hoped to get it into a flower release. But, Ranti, the question was, is this going into a flower and a folio flower release? We started that process, and there are things that the app needs to have in terms of the way, like documentation and certain aspects of the app that need to reach pass an assessment by the technical council, and we failed at that. I'd say failed. We have not yet passed that, reached that level. The issue that we have at the moment is Leipzig, who commissioned this development, are able to deploy it locally because they self-hosted. And so the question is, how do we find the resource to get us from where we are, which is a fully working app that will work in Folio, we know it will work in Folio, to a app in the flower release? I think we're also very much aware, and anybody who was at Vince Burrow's presentation yesterday on platforms, I think he did another one today on applications, but the platform one, I think it's really relevant here, is like, it's not clear to me yet, and I'm although I only say I'm not clear on it because, partly because at the moment we only see adoption of this in a small set of libraries in Germany, this is a library services platform app, and what Vince was describing is the vision, which is, I don't think is like, it's an idea at the moment, it's a point for discussion, but a vision where we can start to look at Folio as having tiers where we have a core set of apps and build on top of that. And this is not, in a sense, this is not new because it's the way we've talked about Folio from the start. But I think that what Vince has done in his presentation, I recommend you go and view the video of that session if you weren't in it, is to start to think about how do we move from where we are today to better version of that vision. And in that, you have the idea of extended apps that sit on top. And if it is the case that this is not a core library service management app, but rather one that some institutions would value, but not all, then maybe it lives in that extended tier of what we might call a platform, but whatever we call it, extended tier. And so that is definitely not happening tomorrow. But I think it just, for us, the open access app kind of raises these questions because, like, there's a cost to getting it to the point. There's a cost all round in adding this to the flower release. There's a cost to us, like in terms of development, getting it to that point where it passes assessment. There's a cost to the technical council to do that assessment. There's a cost to the deployers because they've got another app to deploy. There's a cost to every single level. And like, I would love to see this as part of a flower release, given where we are at the moment. But I also think it's worth us discussing whether it should be or whether it should be above that. Should we, for those who need it, they can install it. For those who don't, it doesn't need to bother them. I don't know. So yeah. Do you have a point about the?
No, I'm just saying it is in Folio Snapshot.
It's in Folio Snapshot.
Yeah, so that's the first step to see it being incorporated.
There's a question at the back.
Thank you. Great work. I'm really excited to see where this goes. So you mentioned Crossref as a potential external data set.
Yeah.
And a few years ago, I worked with Crossref in depth, as well as a few other sources, and it was challenging to get consistent corresponding authors that were correct.
Yeah.
So have you come across that same problem, and have you figured out a way around it, or how are you going to deal with that?
No, I mean, definitely, you know, I'll put a slide up on it. I've written a feature that says this would be nice, but, you know, I've worked with Crossref a bit, but I think not to the extent that I could say, like what you've just said. You know, I've worked with it mainly when you're just trying to enhance some journal metadata or journal article metadata, or maybe not as, where as long as you get the basics right, it's okay. So it sounds like we might find exactly what, you know, I can't imagine that those problems have gone away. This is like, you know, it's metadata, it would be messy. So I expect we'll find something similar. I guess there are things we could think about doing, like, because we could also cross-reference, if you'll excuse the information from Crossref, say with information from the named ORCID and look up on the ORCID. But I'm kind of making stuff up off the top of my head here. I've done work with the ORCID APIs as well, and you know, they have their own issues and they rely on the authors populating stuff, and so no, I don't have a solution, but it'll be interesting. But I can't wait to find out what the problems are, should I say?
Give us another update, please. Yeah, I'd love to hear more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if anybody, I know, I mean, 2 p.m. is early for some, and I know I talked to some people in Australia. It's kind of the middle of the night. I think that's another conversation. But if anybody wants to, you know, the OA SIG is open for business. Come along to a meeting if you want to, like, just bend my ear about something. Let Bjorn know you want to get some stuff on the agenda, and it can go on the agenda. We have an implementers topics page where people can put down, which is a pattern used by several SIGs, where you can just add on the wiki page a topic you want to see discussed. And yeah, sorry, what is it Eastern time? I can't remember. No, so it's 1:30, 8:30 Eastern, I think. So yeah, so it's a challenge, isn't it? But I'm on Slack 24 hours a day, it feels like. I'm on Slack. Please, if you have questions after going away, or you'd like to get an update at any point, message me on Slack and we'll sort something out. Well, thank you very much.